Oh yeah, that
You
was
said
definitely
there's
this
no
one.
such thing as bad publicity.
There's no such thing as bad publicity, kid. No such thing as bad publicity, kid. Get out of here.
They don't know what I know. They don't know.
Hey, it's the Engineering Podcast. I'm Adam.
Brian.
Welcome back to another hang. Thanks for checking us out. Coming to hang out.
Time to
Special
get
thanks.
comfy.
Special thanks, as always, to our backers on Patreon who give us as little as $1 an episode to help keep this thing going. And then, special thanks to people that rate and review us on iTunes. Because, as we'll talk about in this very episode, that's actually really super important for us right now.
If you do one thing today to make yourself proud, it's rate and review us on iTunes.
So, for people that have backed us on Patreon and that are in the Slack channel, if you're watching the episode numbers, you'll see that this one was called Ruthless Opt, which I was trying to write optimization, but there's not enough space.
Too long.
But ruthless is a good word, isn't
It's
it?
a great word. Ruthless. It's fun to say. It's kind of hard, but you're satisfied after you say it. Some words when you go to say them that are difficult to say, they never feel right. Ruthless though is
Well, so here, what did you say when you were trying to find the channel so that you could follow this link?
I yelled at you for your stupid use of creative language instead of descriptive language. This is not an art show. This is a science show. Kidding.
Anyway, what we're really here to talk about is the process we recently went through of kind of revamping all of our properties. And I feel I'm proud of what we have done in the last couple of months, and I'm stoked for everybody to play with it.
Yeah, the first thing for everyone to know is that we've got a brand new website. So you've probably never been to our website, would be my guess. Everyone,
It's nothing personal. That's just how
listening?
podcasts work.
Which is
We're okay
totally fine. But we have a brand new website, and it's got like really pretty pictures and like funny shots of our guests and show notes. And we're trying to start to put links in and old episodes we haven't necessarily caught up on, or maybe we'll never catch up on. But it's been really fun setting this up. And it's a cool looking property. It's in a cool new space.
Let's talk about the changes from what we used to have.
Website, for sure.
We used to run the old website off of Tumblr, which was essentially just a pretty holding tank for the same information that goes out via all the subscription apps.
Yeah, we hosted. Let's give all the detail to everyone. Briefly, we don't need to dive into details, but we used to host, where did we used to host? Starting with like where we hosted our podcast. What was that infrastructure? You set all that stuff up. How did it used to run?
So we used to be set up. We hosted our files on SoundCloud. Well, let's back it up a bit further. We have pre-production channels that have taken a while to iron out, and we really have dialed in this process. We have pre-production channels for basically every loose idea.
Chat channels.
They're just chat channels where it's like, hey, here's something I thought about. Like there's one called Rap Battles where we're talking to our buddy Pete about an episode where he's going to explain the world of competitive rap battles.
That's going to be awesome.
People attend events.
What the hell is that? That sounds amazing.
Right? Like he can talk about the strength of brackets. Like he talks about rap battling the way you hear ESPN anchors talk about boxing. It's outstanding. Anyway, so that will eventually coalesce into an idea that we do an episode about. And then we use that as a holding tank for anything that comes up during the episode. Then I edit the episode. And while I'm editing, I dump quotes out that we could use for some other form of media. I mean, that's it in Slack, right? Then we use Slack as a holding tank where we talk about editing decisions, like what the title of the episode is going to be. We finalize a description and we dump that in there. And then I have a series of Zapier triggers that are able to pull the text out of these production channels and populate all manner of like social promo and blog post stuff.
all of our production stuff has been pretty heavily optimized for a while now, right? Like creation and editing and how we work together to get this stuff done in episodes and where we track all the info. So that the production process has been pretty smooth. We've got that
Making
dialed
sure
in.
the podcast keeps coming out the door and that we're optimally making sure that everyone is able to find the podcast if they've bumped into it somewhere, which is how it happens now, right? Like I mention it to a person and they go, I'll check that out. Or they see a thing that I reposted on Facebook and they say, oh, I'll check that out. Do you want to talk about the technology what is that infrastructure supporting? All of those things I just described, like what's the broader thing it's the underlying protocol for a podcast, I feel like maybe is the thing to talk about. We mention it. It comes up briefly in an episode with the CTO of Breaker, a podcast app that we like, but I don't know when that's been released.
That might be our next episode. Oh, who relative to this one? I think we just released that episode.
Or we're about to release that episode.
It's a fun time travel game to play. We either just released it, we're about to release it, we already released it, or it will be released sometime in the future.
It's been recorded. And there we talk about the actual technology, but the infrastructure that I just talked about essentially just hosts an MP3 file and makes it so that all of these different applications can grab a feed that comes out of that hosting entity. And that feed is called RSS, which we have mentioned before in passing, which is just like essentially a communication protocol for passing along only the essential information contained in a blog post. Yeah. Or any web page, really, right? Like the fact that a picture is of a certain size and in a certain location relative to the text is not as important as here's all that text. Here's all the ideas.
The RSS feed, RSS, which maybe people have heard of, I don't really know. It's kind of it's sort of an antiquated web technology at this point. It was originally made to syndicate like blog posts and things that you wrote online on your website on a blog. Or a newspaper, to syndicate those out, to push them out. People had a thing called an RSS reader, which I think they were really popular like 10 years ago. I used to use them for all my news. I still do a little bit. But basically, it was just something that would go update. It would go ping. Instead of me having to go to 10 different blogs every day to read my news, it would go get the articles because those blogs would post this RSS feed, which was just, hey, here are all my blog posts ever, and an app can download them. And then podcasts, which are kind of this like old school technology. Podcasts haven't really taken off until recently. Like people didn't know what a podcast was until a year or two ago when whatever that really popular one, Serial, came out, really like exposed the world to podcasts. But podcasts just jumped on the RSS bandwagon, which is the same old technology. And so all it is it's just a text file that we post on our webpage, and things like iTunes podcast app know to download it every day and see if there's new information. And in it is like each episode and the title of it and a picture and a link to the file that has the audio. It's just this really simple way for us to push out our podcast data to other computers to pick up to then let you listen to our podcast.
So that's how the infrastructure works. And that's like the idea that the infrastructure is supporting. But one of the realities of making a project like this is if we're not both working on something that we're stoked about, we just don't do it.
That was a big rule with this project.
It's not a personal thing. It's just a matter of when you're talking about a side project like this, it's harder to just get up and do a piece that you're just not excited about.
We've tried to do probably 25 maybe way more artistic projects together, and this has been the only one that's ever really stuck that we've persisted through. And in total, this is probably my most successful creative project ever. We've invested so much into this, but right, that was one of our rules. One of our rules in doing this podcast from the beginning has been, this is for fun. If we're not enjoying something, let's not do it, because we really want to keep this going, and that's worked really well.
And we try to keep that as the mission for the whole project, but we both are also technology entrepreneurs, and Like you literally work at a big data company. Like you can't not be aware of how things are in the ecosystem where we're hosting this thing, right? Like
Can't not feel a bit defeated when I create something and push it out on the internet and it's not optimized for maximum exposure.
part of why we're fired up about the new stuff has to do with it just looks better. Like we have
cool.
managed to get the design element workflow dialed in so much that at very little extra expense, we have just really good looking stuff. Which I feel like an asshole saying because I designed it largely. But it looks good.
It looks awesome, which is super fun. I go to our website like 100 times a day, as I do with every website I make and run, and it looks super dope. And it makes me feel really good looking at it and like seeing our guests on it, and they look super dope. How cool does Scott look standing next to this old car in our most recent episode? He looks awesome. It's like the coolest photo ever. And those little board guys in the episode before that.
I just poached that off Facebook.
It's great. I mean, it could be a better
So we
photo.
talked about like so the changes we made were to switch a couple of platforms. I don't know how important it really is to talk about the platforms specifically, but we switched over to having our main site be more like a magazine kind of setup on a platform called Medium that is just a whole lot better for publishing the kind of stuff that we want to publish. So like I have a lot of writing I did in law school about technology and decentralization and the law. And I kind of like the epiphany for me that was like, oh shit, let's move the whole thing over here. Was I just realized like, if I do I've been trying to figure out, I got like 200 pages of stuff I wrote in school about decentralization and the government that I think would be dope to get out there.
Hell yeah.
But I don't have time to write a book, and it's not a fulfilling project to try to flesh that out in the place where I think it could go.
That's not the move for writing books anymore anyway.
Yeah. So I realized that I already have a buttload of content that if I just reframe a little, we can push out over that. But then we haven't even ended up doing that. Instead, our successful posts so far have just been like, I woke up one morning and was like, I just realized the thing about Bitcoin.
Well, that's what's cool. We've been talking about having a blog for a really long time, and we've both resisted because we're like, we can't possibly spend time writing articles. Like it's hard enough putting the podcast together and getting episodes out. It's a ton of work. But we just both really like writing. I really love writing, actually. It's really, really good for me. I feel great afterwards. It satisfies my creative urge. It clarifies my thoughts. Like I feel it's meditative for me. And we've wanted that for a while. And we've discovered the way to make it functional for the podcast and to make it fun for ourselves, which is the combo we're looking for. That's been really hard to find.
And the part of us that's aware of the big data side and the part I was talking about before is also stoked about this because it's content we want to deliver. I think with early tests, we found out that it's effective in terms of being content that we can push out that causes people to pay attention and take part in the conversation, like whatever you want to call it.
The first article you wrote for our blog saw like 900 hours of reading time. We killed it. We set up a blog post and you wrote an article, this weird, like really super niche, specific, timely, facts-based article. And I was like, I guess let's try Reddit for promotion. And you nailed it. We nailed it. It's like 2,000 readers. Since then, we've been not quite as successful, but what a great launch. Like really fired us up to be working on this platform.
Yeah.
It's good space.
Well, and so that's an interesting piece of it, right? Because the idea of that attention, the idea that we have listeners for this podcast that we don't know, it's like it's a really cool thing. But then also it feels like it's a little slimy to be like 900 hours, like look at all that attention I'm getting. It's like, when you're like, I shared this thing. And we seem to, with that one, have cracked a way to go put something into that area where people want to consume and talk about it.
Well, it speaks to what we were trying to do here, which is kind of what we wanted to hit with this episode, right? Is this concept of analytics and optimizing a process and looking at using a feedback loop to kind of guide us as we do something that we're trying to optimize it to be creative and fun, right? I guess that's like got to be our number one purpose, or else we're not going to do it. But number two here is like people listen to this and like it. I have tons of friends that are regular listeners and talk to me about my podcast. My brother listens to every episode. Like, it's really awesome and it's really fun. It makes me feel really, really good inside when we do episodes. So how do we get this out to more people? Like, it seems like people like it.
Well, and so rule number one is
don't talk about
if it stops being fun for either of us, it's going to fall apart.
Totally.
So there's this component of optimization where the process has to be dialed in enough that all the things that we are like anal about because we're aware of the data situation on the other side is like, well, the threshold for executing any of those can't be higher than this is a hassle.
Totally.
I don't,
And we've got to make sure that, like, I don't want to write blog posts and post. I don't want to spend hours writing a blog post if I know that we don't have like a good email sign up funnel, which is a silly thing. And that a lot of people be like, well, don't let that hold you up from writing good content on the internet. But also let that hold you up. Like, get your email funnel set up right? Get subscribed, like get some action from what you're producing if you're trying to grow something.
Because you've lived in startup land where it's important to optimize like acquisition funnels and stuff, like the idea that you're even aware that this is stuff that could be optimized, is next level startup shit. I feel like
certainly
it's definitely next level data awareness, but it creates a thing where I'm aware that there are things I can plug in that will cause that feedback loop, right? I'm motivated to keep writing because it seems like some people dug it. And I'm just trying to get an idea out there about this is how blockchain might fit into the world, or this is how the government might, whatever. Like, I feel like this whole project for us is just about like, here's some shit I think you should know about.
Blockchain has become the new poop. You used to bring up poop in every episode, or every time I talked to you, basically. Now you bring up blockchain every time we talk, which I think is it's different.
Everybody poops.
It's different, at least.
Everybody poops.
Everybody blockchains.
I feel like we've got a sense at this point of where we were coming from, where we went. Mm-hmm. Like it's almost like we're through the State of the Union part of it. So the changes we made. Do you want to run through those from let's talk about what's our stack?
Yeah.
You're the programmer.
What's our podcast tech stack? So our tech stack for our podcast now is basically just two things. We swapped out of a bunch of other things we've tried and done, and we've landed on a new host. We now host our actual podcast episodes, like the physical files, the MP3s, on a system called Libsyn, LIBSIN.com.
Stands for Liberated Syndication.
Yeah, that sounds right. And it's specifically a company that hosts and helps you like send out podcasts. And so we switched hosting everything over to there. It gives us a bunch of interesting stuff like analytics and stuff. And then we moved our website to a platform called medium.com, which is essentially like a blogging platform. We'll explain more about it in a second. But those two things, we've kind of cleaned up our properties. We now have this really organized hosting platform, which allows us to really see what's going on, where are users coming from, what applications are they using to listen to our podcast. And then we have this awesome new platform that's in sort of a social journalism system, social journalistic blogging, that is going to allow us to do to add writing to what we do, to add some stuff that we can start to promote a little better, right? We can get our episodes out to listeners through this platform. We can write articles that we can share on the internet. There's just a place where we can add some more of the creativity that we've both been desiring to toss into the podcast to augment what we're writing.
So the first rule is stoke. And I think Medium is the one we're probably itching to talk about because I'm fired up for how Medium seems to be playing out.
I like Medium. It's a network not a network. It's like a marketplace of writers and journalists, and that's kind of the angle they're going for. So we set up our website on there, so now we can actually post our podcast episodes there as like episode posts, as stories or articles or whatever you want to call them. And we have a blog there now, and it's a really cool setup over there.
Medium structures things more like the idea is to have a magazine. They call them publications, and then you have writers who have their personal accounts, and you can follow writers and you can follow the magazines that they write for, and you see other things that they recommend, and you see other things that they highlight or other comments that they put on other pieces and stuff.
It's a really cool platform.
If you want to follow feeds, but it's all around content that's more like a 5-minute to 25-minute read.
The average post is a 7-minute read on Medium, I think, which is significant.
In terms of the dynamic, it's a lot like Twitter. But 7 minutes is really high when you realize that those average numbers are generally on websites thrown off by like bots.
7 minutes is astronomically high for
that
engagement on the
probably means
internet.
that the average person is actually reading your page for 20 minutes. Because that number's watered down by a lot of traffic that's incidental. What's this? I don't like it.
Medium is a really cool platform. It captures a lot of I'm just getting familiar with it because we just started using it for our website, but you picked a really, really good spot for this. I think it captures a whole bunch of attributes and features and characteristics that are really trying to bring journalism, bring good writing kind of into the digital age, which has struggled, right? Because we plopped writing onto the internet, and then Twitter exploded, and we're like, holy shit, you can share so much useless crap in a sentence on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and Medium is set up.
But you can also sometimes have really valuable conversations and foment revolutions. Like
you can, but no one's reading long articles anymore, and there's something interesting, at least, that if not valuable, and Medium's specifically trying to promote.
And one of the things that they work on a lot, as far as my having read their documentation and stuff, like they are really focused on the discovery piece. Like, how do you surface? Reddit gets traffic because it's, for however it works, is really good at surfacing stuff that I want to see all the time. Some of that has to do with a little bit of filter bubbling. A lot of it has to do with users voting things up or down. Medium kind of works the same way, but there's no like voting up and down, but there is similar dynamics, and it's built around, I think their algorithm just tries to surface stuff that's well written, that's, other people seem to like, has big pretty pictures, all these things that make a magazine. Like, it kind of forces you into design decisions that are a lot better for the consuming of long form content.
So that's where we've set up our website now. And
so now our main site is just a Medium publication.
Yeah, it's basically a magazine, but like every other post or whatever is an episode of ours. And the beyond kind of like the tech that we just talked about, one of the reasons we picked this spot is because not only does it allow an interesting way to engage with people that I think will be really beneficial to us, but it also seems to be our target demographic on this site pretty heavily. There's a lot of startup, there's a lot of technology, a lot of science, a lot of well-written journalistic type articles, which is what we've kind of been inspired to write from doing the podcast, to kind of augment like the fun of the podcast. We also want to dump out a lot of the information that we kind of pick up in research and side projects and reading. So it's a good spot for us to target our potential audience.
Well, it's also, like, I have stuff I want to talk about that we do cover on the podcast, but you just can't chase it all the way down the rabbit hole unless you want to give me 5,000 words.
I'm amazed how often we stop miles short of where we prepared for a podcast episode. Which maybe we can try someday where we're like super hyper targeted and really dive as deep as we can into one little tiny niche, but
we haven't done that in a while. Okay, so past Medium and what it lets us do in terms of what we can put out and be our home on the web. The other thing we did is less about Stoked and more about the part of doing something like this for us is just the result of 12 years of living in like startup land where I am aware of all kinds of ways to guide a decision based on data that you can collect from various places all over the, a digital. If you have a feed going out digitally, there's data you can collect. Like, what extra stuff are we getting because we switched to Libsyn?
We can see specifically the concept of acquisition funnels, I think is what you might hear them called, but how people are getting to our podcast, how people are coming to our website and listening to our content. What applications are they listening to? Are they using Apple's podcast application? Are they using Stitcher? Are they using Breaker? Like, what systems are they using? Where are they coming from? How did they find it? It's just a bunch of information about kind of, if you run a store, like, where are your customers coming from? How are they getting there? Did you run an ad in the local newspaper, and is that how they came in? It's that kind of stuff. But that helps us guide where do we put our content, right? It's a balance of, we want to grow our podcast, but we want to enjoy what we're doing. So if we know that when I write a blog post that's going to promote the podcast, that it goes out where people are going to see it. So it's just simple as that,
Well, what's interesting, I think, that is the shift that we like, the delivery of media, which we have talked about this on a couple of other episodes, right? Like, this weird democratization of the creation and distribution mechanism for all manner of media has been like steadily diffused, I feel like. And it's now, there's a two-way communication channel where there used to be a one-way channel, essentially, right? Like, TV networks used to show a show and you watch it. And if you're picked, you can fill out a questionnaire to tell them how you felt about it.
Right. If you signed up to get a Nielsen's rating box or whatever, right, you'd fill out a notebook. But that stuff didn't work anyway. We now know, now that we're tracking digitally, that was just a waste of time.
Right. And so now we have this digital world where we can see this signal that, like, essentially comes back to us that we can listen to and interpret in any given way about how we're doing at the thing that we're trying to do.
Well, it's funny.
If your goal is get on Bill Nye's show, then the first thing you got to do is get relevant to Bill Nye. Right? Like, if those are our people, we can go look at the other stuff that they like on Facebook, that they interact with on Twitter. We can get a sense of how to target in the digital space our demographic. And when we have a stream of data coming back that tells us how we're doing at any one of those places, we can just not, it comes down to this, like, the second rule of optimization is no wasted time. Even if I like doing tweets, if you'd like taking pictures and sending them out over Instagram after you photo edit them, if that's not going to drive people being involved in the community in a way that satisfies rule number one that we're stoked about, then fuck it, we're not even going to bother. So if you follow us on Twitter, you're going to get a steady feed of articles that I remember to put on Twitter because I think they're kind of interesting. Sometimes I'll respond to you, and you'll never miss an episode because they'll go out via Twitter. Right? But otherwise, we're just not seeing conversion off of, our people aren't hanging out on Twitter yet. Yeah. Maybe later they will be, but right now they're not. And right now they're hanging out
or
on
we just aren't getting to them through the network we have at the moment, right? So we've kind of dialed into the location where we're seeing some traction,
like the digital discovery mechanism where we're finding some traction, but we're getting this feedback. So you're like, it becomes already, with just the, people that we have involved in the Slack channel, like, it can be a really rich conversation if you execute it properly and stay authentic to it, like a subset of core ideals, I think. But it always still feels a little slimy, I feel like, to be like, oh, it's over here, we're doing better. I don't know why. Because it's about getting more attention, and that's supposed to be rude.
It's a really interesting conversation here, right? Which isn't exactly what we meant this episode to be, but it's unavoidable, right? The idea that we started a podcast specifically because we wanted to do something creative together, and we very explicitly said this is not a startup. We're not running this like a business. We're not going to try to make money off this right now. We're not going to optimize every little bit of it because we just want to have fun and enjoy it. And that was smart, right? Like we've created this fun artistic project that we both really enjoyed doing. But at some point, it's like, well, I also want to be famous, I guess. I don't know what or I want to make money off of this or something, right? Like I'm putting time and effort into it. So I want to capitalize on something.
There is a way to monetize it. And if you deny that, you're just young.
Well, it's a weird
Honestly.
conversation, right? Because what really is the point of this other than it brings me joy to do it? But even at that very beginning stage, I think it's ignorant to pretend like we were only doing this to enjoy it, right? I wanted people to listen to it. If absolutely no one had listened to this, there's no way we'd still be doing it, right? Like if we didn't have friends who were listening to this. So it brings you back to this conversation where like there's part of being human that desires and needs feedback from people. And it used to just be I would sing a song in the town square and maybe some maidens from the house next door would come listen and clap along and dance in their tap shoes. But now, what a weird reference that turned into. But now
just showing up, rolling
now
town
it
to
starts
town
to feel slimy. It's that transition where you go from, hey, I'm just engaging with other humans to you're making this weird jump where you go from I'm a human creating something for other humans, but in between me and those other humans are two computers. There's my computer and there's their computer. And I now have the ability to like do all this stuff in between where our computers look at each other and we optimize and we send to other computers and other computers do this and they can be beep, beep, boop, bop, boop, beep, beep, boop, bop.
We make decisions about who we think will like it, like, and that's not a thing we're optimizing. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, they're all just mechanisms for using some sort of social data input to surface stuff people want to
capture
look
attention, to get your eyeballs to look at
They
something.
literally have an algorithm that is ranking stuff based on how much it thinks you'll like it. And so just by knowing that the people that we would rather talk to are on Reddit, we can say, well, you know what wasn't working? Memes, which is ironic because that's what Reddit's kind of known for. But among our people, the people that seem to subscribe to the podcast and join in on the conversation, they want to read 5,000 word articles about the vagaries of cryptocurrency and blockchain decentralization.
They certainly enjoyed the one you wrote.
So I think one of the things about the data and the two-way communication is when you have data coming in, you can set up what you have written about in blog posts on the site and stuff as, in the concept of a feedback loop, in an engineering context. You have data coming in with a goal in mind, and you can react to that data in order to better try to reach that goal.
Yeah, we've got... there's an interesting thing happening now with all kinds of creative output and the sharing of information on the internet where I produce art or I produce something creative, I share it via a computer, via my smartphone or my desktop or whatever, and then for it to get to the other human being to enjoy it or use it or whatever, they also consume it through a computer or a smartphone. Same thing, right? And so in between, you get all this access to information. And what that provides to you as like a digital producer on the internet, us pushing out our podcast, is all of a sudden I have a real feedback loop of what's happening. When you listen to our podcast, I don't know who you are. I don't know the person necessarily, but I see information about your phone requesting it now. So if you listen to our podcast, it's cool. I can see, hey, this person just listened to our podcast using iTunes podcast app. Or they came to our website and looked at some articles and then clicked over and they must have liked those articles because then they listened to the podcast. And so you get this feedback loop all of a sudden where in the context of our podcast, there are three things in my mind with feedback loops. There's set a goal. What are you trying to do? And in our case, we want to grow our podcast, right? We want more exposure. We want more people subscribed. We want more people sharing it, talking about it. So our goal is like to grow something, right? Whether it's grow our email sign up list or to grow subscribers through podcast apps. Then you do step 2 of feedback loop, which is measure it. So now we've got the tools to measure stuff. We can really see where are people coming from? How are they interacting? Are they listening to whole episodes? Are they reading blog posts? What are they doing? And then step 3 is you make an adjustment to affect what's going on to reach your goal. And then you kind of just loop on those 2 things. Hey, we measured stuff and people like it over here, so we'll do more of that. They don't like this thing, so we'll stop doing that. And so we start to get these interesting metrics, and we can make intelligent decisions about where we produce our content, where we push our art, and makes us feel warm and fuzzy. And then we can produce more, and different feedback loop layers on, and everyone's happy.
So let's talk specifically about what we did with the title and the description and the photos in order to reach the goal, which was we had like a 3-day sprint or so where we bared down on, let's see if within a few days we can drive our ranking for a search in iTunes up. And we did. We got in 2 days from 69 up to like 41 if you search for engineering on iTunes.
Yeah, we just some simple things. I mean, we read a lot about how first of all, the thing that was blatantly apparent after we doing research and setting stuff up is the majority of podcasting is being consumed through Apple's products, through Apple's podcast apps, through Apple's ecosystem, whether or not that's Android or iPhone or whatever. Like, it's just Apple's dominating it. So we realized,
Apple actually holds a registry that a lot of other apps, like Stitcher, I think, for example, just combs Apple's database and repurposes the data. It's not
Apple's driving the whole market, essentially.
They're driving even more than just they have a podcast app and it's popular.
And so that's why it's so important that our listeners rate and review us on iTunes. Tell us how you feel. Give us a good, honest score. Anyway, so so we realized how important Apple iTunes is. And so then we dug in a little bit. Hey, how does this system work? Like, where are they getting our information from? What matters to their ranking algorithms? How do you get shown in different places around Apple? And we just realized, hey, we weren't doing...
What trends seem to be effective for other podcasts? And there are podcasts where guys talk about the trends and how they adapted to them.
Right, so we realized, hey, we were kind of loose with some stuff when we started out, or we just hadn't thought about this or didn't know how this stuff worked.
No, because priority 1 was keep the podcast coming out the door, and it's fun. And not fun to... The first thing you got to dial in is how's the podcast keep coming out? Like, that's the main thing. But we passed that. We got that dialed in. The podcast is a well-oiled production machine.
The production process flows well. So in looking at all the stuff going on within Apple's podcast ecosystem, we realized, hey, there's some simple tweaks we can make that'll make a big difference. Like, for instance, we hadn't thought about the idea of our podcast name being utterly meaningless to everyone on Earth and not being findable because you can't search. No one's going to search for Zengineering. It's not a word. So instead of our name on Apple's podcast app being Zengineering Podcast, we changed it to Zengineering, a philosophy of science, technology, and engineering, because it now makes sense to people who are looking for it. Hey, what the hell is Zengineering? Oh, I see. It's a thing I might want to listen to.
We also got the word engineering into the title, which is probably what actually caused the bump from 69 to 41 over the course of 2 days. And something like that it's not about gaming the system so much as realizing that there's a flow for how people use this thing to discover podcasts, and no one is searching for Zengineering unless I handed them a business card.
Google doesn't even accept our podcast title as a word that people want to search for, and it autocorrects it to engineering, which is endlessly frustrating. So be wary if you search that you're not actually searching for Zengineering sometimes.
But then we also did a sweep to make the picture that shows up in the feed look cooler for every episode and varied for every episode because it draws better attention. We've also started making our descriptions longer which gets us, I think, more keywords into their algorithm, but also makes it so that we can have more compelling show notes, which is a piece of the medium part I don't think we hit, which is that we've dialed in a way to dump all of the links that we run into when we're doing research into, which are in a Slack channel already. We've worked out a pretty clean way to get those into a post that goes out along with the episode. So hit up our Slack and you can check it out sooner, but also always check out the website for the show notes that go along with the episode.
Yeah, we've captured everything we do now. Our blog,
our pop music episode was a glorious feed of strange pop music from our formative years.
That's a very long post, but it's got a lot of good stuff. And we got like quotes on there, and we got images from the episode. We got our little cards that go out on Instagram, the pictures that go up in the podcasting. It's good capture of everything.
Yeah, I think I'm catching media out of this thing. For how little work goes into keeping it afloat, I'm very proud of how much content comes out the other side.
We've struck on a really cool model here, I think, where we've taken a whole bunch of stuff and really optimized every piece of it, right? We've found the artistic medium that we're enjoying, and we've optimized the production. We've found a platform that we enjoy writing on that actually exposes us to our market and engages users in a way that we enjoy and promotes content of the type that we want to make. We've found promotional models through platforms that we consume on, that we're familiar with, where we can target these little niches that happen to line up with the niche topics that we do in each episode. And so just each little phase of this, we've kind of found our place on the internet and where we're comfortable and feel at home. And so we can go out into the city square now and sing our hearts out, and it feels like we're in the right spot digitally. So we're just happy to be where we are.
And there's a component of that that's this weird piece of like organization. Like the cool thing about digital technology is because you can, at low marginal cost, go after smaller niches. Did I say that right? Marginal cost. At lower expense, you can go after niches and you can make money off of just maybe 10,000 people like your stuff. So you can target, rowers. And that's a pretty big group of people. It's not important enough that their stuff shows up in mainstream media. But if you write stuff for them, they'll come check it out.
Tons of rowers. There's just so many people on Earth that any weird thing you pick, there are going to be thousands, if not tens, hundreds, or millions of them doing that thing. There are probably like 1 million people that have at some point been involved in some capacity with like professional rowing, right? So it's a huge, all these strange little niches. When you get to the scale of the internet, all of a sudden you can, if you find the right place, if you engage the right communities, you can target at depth and still feel like you're at this tremendous scale. When else in human history have you been able to engage 1 million people? I think on the surface with the internet, everyone's like, oh, well, Kim Kardashian sends a tweet and 48 million people see it. But that's an anomaly. That's like almost a fantasy thing, right? That's just so abnormal and unlikely that you should not pay any attention to it. But writing a really cool article about some technique that you perfected in your NCAA rowing club in college, or rowing team in college, then pushing that out to 10,000 other professional rowers on some forum about rowing, college rowing. It's amazing the exposure you can get and the depth of engagement and the excitement those people are going to have about that little piece of knowledge that's so core to something that they love so much.
Hey, man, I like the Red Sox. I see you're wearing a Red Sox hat. This all comes down to just like nerds talking to one another at a party. Hey, man, you seem non-threatening. How's stuff?
Totally. Can I open up to you and share how obsessed I am with rowing? That's what it all comes down to, right?
But I think, we have found with what we saw in the data enough to push us to look at it more closely that we're accessing a pretty cool community of people. And if you would like to access a community of pretty cool people, you can back us on Patreon, for where people are throwing us as little as $1 an episode to help keep this thing going. Or you could rate and review us on iTunes, because that's basically the main metric for this shit still. If you take one thing away from this podcast about our facelift, we didn't even really talk about the cosmetics.
Yeah, we did.
It looks dope.
It looks awesome. Our website looks super cool. I really like to go look at it. So you might also.
So check it out. Zengineeringpodcast.com. That's patreon.zengineeringpodcast.com. Patreon. Or just rate and review on iTunes.
Hell yeah.
Well, thanks for hanging out for another one of these. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian. And don't forget to pay attention to those delicious little data nuggets that are all around you.
What I know,
Nom, nom, nom.
they don't know. Like I know.
Save the poor iPad before it dies.